Adam paced back and forth in front of Eve, but Eve was still sitting on the dead tree, examining every detail of death, the grayness, the dryness, the utter lifelessness. How did the life leave? Was she herself life, or was life something within her that might leave? She didn't know, but she wondered. She didn't think Adam knew either. Only God knows, she said at last. Adam looked up now from his thoughts. Only God knows what, he said. What I am, Eve said. You're Eve, Adam retorted. I know that. Yes, I know that I'm Eve. But what is Eve? What is living? Huh? Adam was almost caught away from his critical situation to thinking about dead things. We have no time for thinking about dead trees. God will take care of the thinking of dead things, he said. We will take care of the thinking of shelter. We could get inside this tree, Eve said assuringly. Plenty big for sleeping, and the wind can't find us in there. We'll be warm if we sleep in there. Is that what dead things are for, Adam? Are we supposed to find these things that die and use them for our own needs? Adam was contemplating what Eve was saying. It really wasn't a bad idea. There was plenty of room. Maybe this was something God had provided for them. He thought, was there a reason that things die? But really Adam knew the dead things were dying because of their rebellion. It seemed strange to make use of these things for their own pleasure when it had been them who had caused their death. He would have to think of these things later. Right now, he had to get Eve a place to live. Come inside, Adam. It's warm in here. We can't live here, said Adam. He stood straight with pride. I shall not use these dead things for my own needs. I shall provide for you myself. But why, Adam? I like it here. It was a beautiful place, Adam thought. It was almost like Eden. Even the dead things had a sort of beauty. He wondered why dead things could be beautiful. Not far from there was a cascading waterfall that bounded down from the nearby cliffs. There were plenty of water for drinking here, and bathing. And the songbirds seemed to be singing, as though it were only for Adam and Eve that they played their beaks. Adam had thought that God would not protect them. But here and there, he did find things that just seemed to indicate that this was for them. Adam was really baffled by all of his surroundings. Why would God create these things for him? Why would God make trees die because he sinned? And then, as if everything quite depended upon him, even Eve was more and more seeming to depend upon him. Adam wondered how he would bear all of the new burdens. He remembered God's words to him only yesterday. The ground shall be cursed on his account. Who was Adam to be responsible for all these things? Adam walked over to the other side of the log. There was grass bristling up to his ankles. Adam could feel the soft touch of the blades as they tickled his feet. It was beautiful here, he thought again. He walked further towards the pond-like lake, which was more than 50 yards from the log where Eve lay. The water was crystal clear, and he could see fish swimming around in the water. Adam wondered about fish. Were they like other animals? Did they like to play and sleep? As Adam approached the big pond, he could hear the rushing sound of the falls as they hit the waters beneath. There was a doe and her fawn waiting silently in the shallow places. The little fawn was drinking the cool water. Adam wondered if his child would look like him, only smaller. Yes, in many ways Adam liked his new home. He even thought he liked to work hard, for in that way it made Eve love him more and seemed to bring him closer together. Eve now touched his shoulder and slid her eloquent hand down Adam's back as she knelt down beside him. Adam hadn't known that she was behind him, but he didn't show her that he was startled. They sat quietly, Eve comforting Adam with her touch, just staring and wondering, thoughts that left questions in both of their minds that only God could answer. Dusk came and found Adam snuggled next to Eve, deep inside the big tree. This was their home, and as it was meant to be. That night Adam and Eve learned something far more beautiful than waterfalls and dead trees. Adam grew to love Eve more and more. And Eve was happy, happier than anyone could ever be, she thought. At that moment she knew that God had done something far greater than they had imagined before, and that there was a very great plan that was being worked out for them both. Their destiny had been written. God's plan was being worked out. Theirs would be the destinies of beautiful grace. Life was so wonderful. And Eve was bound up with great happiness. Yes, she could hardly find room in her heart for her joy. Months passed now. Adam and Eve were still enjoying their fascinating life of intrigue and illusion. Life didn't seem real to Adam anymore. His life was taking on new meanings now. It seemed to find its wandering within the changing scenes of country and phantasmal spasmodics. It was the changing reality. Trees were like illusions. Mountains were like higher planes of consciousness. There was where the evil god must live, he suspected. He saw many mountains in his wanderings. There were little hills, great spiraling tower-like edifices, and cascading crags, tapering off into the deep basin bluffs, overhanging bent mile-high canyons. But there was one mountain that seemed to be intriguing, curiously towering, standing almost alone above the rest, and without a doubt, fear-inspiring. And this mountain was different in other ways, too. It spoke. Its voice moaned as though in agony. It steamed from its top as though with a raging tempest. This was where God had banished the slanderer, he thought. And though that was somewhat comforting, Adam still wondered. Its rage. It was awesomely terrifying. He remembered the words of the slanderer, "I am God, and I shall make thee to do an act of worship to me. I shall sit at the assembly of the gods." And God's words to Eve, "He shall bruise thy heel." What would it all mean? Only the cycles of the sun disk would tell. Adam wondered what would happen after many suns had come and gone. Adam had been out in the woodlands of the great giant trees almost all day. The trees were so large and huge. Many of them reached to the sky, to the heavens. He had seen the edge of the woodlands today, although it had cost him nearly 3/4 of this arcing sun disk. Adam had wondered if the world had ended there, or whether it went on into other mysterious places. It went on, but Adam knew of no way to get beyond its boundary, for at the edge of the woodland there lay, as it were, a great chasm. The chasm was 7 days' journey deep, and at least that many days' journey wide. It cut across the breadth of the earth like the great serpent that wreathed through the swampy marshland. Beyond the brim of the chasm he had never gone, nor could he ever imagine to go. Adam gave that land the name of Nod, for that would be a place of a fugitive to travel, and not the man Adam. It was nearly dark when Adam finally reached the dead tree. Adam had unrestful feelings near all the way back. Something wasn't sitting right with Adam. Approaching the tree from the backside, Adam could hear unusual sounds. Eve was moaning and breathing strangely. Adam rushed over to the big hole on the other side of the twisted dead tree. Eve was lying on her back with her legs all scrunched up against the top of the ceiling of the hollow. She looked at Adam without changing her position. Adam crawled into the mouth of the opening. He sat staring at Eve for a moment, and then he left her alone. He knew that it had come time for the birth of his child, and there was nothing he could do to stop the pain. For it had been decreed by the angel, "It shall be with great pain that ye shall bring forth the delivering one." Well, the time had come, and now he must wait. So in time Adam's son grew strong and tall, and he had another son as well. The first son he called Cain, but his younger brother he named Abel. Now Cain and Abel grew up under the watchful eye of their parents, but as young boys will usually do, they many times fought. A great opposition began to grow among the two brothers. Cain was a big man with thick black hair, his shoulders and neck a massive size. and with the strength of an ox he could usually outperform Abel with little effort. Abel, on the other hand, was more delicate, more astute with the finer things in life. Cain thought that Abel should work harder. "He doesn't pull his weight around here." And Cain would say, "He's always lying around dreaming," and Cain's wrath grew from day to day. As they matured into manhood, Cain took to doing the hardest jobs. Cain eventually became the breadwinner of the family. Cain cultivated much of the marshland near where they had lived, now for more than 30 years. But Abel came to admire the animals, spending most of his time grooming and just talking to the creatures he would chance to meet. Of course he knew he had responsibilities too, but he would find a better way to find nourishment. Working that hard old ground day and night for sustenance was, in his opinion, uncanny. Surely God didn't have that kind of laborious travail in mind when he put them out in this fairest of all elements. There was sure to be other means of food to be found. So Abel thought to himself, what has God intended for man? Where are the secrets of life hidden? He would ask his fair-weather friends when he made his daily rounds through the countryside. In time, he had found many of God's secrets within nature. As Abel watched the animals, he noticed that they didn't work. The cow ate grass, and it was provided for him plentifully. Abel tried eating grass. He found it was untasteful. It made him vomit. The birds ate little nuts and bark from trees, but that wouldn't work for a human because he could not find enough nuts for his terrible hunger. Abel didn't like bark enough to even give it a healthy try. But Abel soon learned of things to eat like milk and honey. He found that he could make the milk into cheese and butter. He learned about eggs and caviar. And this was what Abel brought to the table to supplement Cain's growing garden foods. Adam and Eve would cook the many fruits that Cain would bring to the dinner. Eve found that many of the roots could be boiled and made into a broth. Others could be crushed and into a mesh and baked. It took many years of trial and error, but Abel's milk and cheese were used to make breads and delicacies that Adam and Eve relished. When Cain saw that Abel's contribution was the favorite, his wrath grew. So Cain began to cultivate the ground, which by doing he increased the size and the abundance of the various roots and flowering buds that grew from what he planted. But this still took lots of time and great strenuous effort. In the end, it took long hours each day for his garden to grow much food, with little more worth than Abel's, which he was simply gathering and churning. Now Abel had invented another thing, which Adam and Eve had praised their son for in considerable merriment. Adam and Eve had until this time been wearing leaves and grass-like skirts. Not that they really needed clothing for warmth, seldom got cold, but because that was the way Eve had instructed them to do. Eve considered this sexual organ something to be kept private, unseen, hidden. Now the killing of animals for either food or clothing had not been allowed either then nor at any other time thereafter for over 1,000 years. True, many years later the giants came and began to kill. This was the great terror to all men on earth. But Abel came to be a herder of sheep and cattle. Abel began to shave the wool that the sheep had so much of an abundance of, and he weaved that together to make a substance which became a cloth, which he and Adam would wear around their loins. But Eve would wear this over her entire body, for she said, "My sons have no women. I fear they will see my body and think unthinkable thoughts. For my body is for Adam alone. God shall yet provide for my children's mates." But Abel's soft wool clothes made Eve very happy indeed. Now Cain, in his pride, refused to wear these soft clothes made by his younger brother. "These clothes are for those who are soft in heart," he said. So by and by their rivalry grew more. Now Abel, with his softer character, began to inhabit the highland thicket country, where there were many animals and birds. He became a herder of sheep and cattle. While in Cain's bitterness he went out from his father and mother, despising his father's counsel, who had said, "He shall not go near the chasm of Nod, for no one shall go there and keep living." He went out, he took up dwelling in that land. Now the land of Nod produced no vegetation whatsoever. It was just rock, with only very little soil, but enough soil that in time Cain had a variety of plants and food-bearing trees and shrubs growing. Cain was determined to show his father that he could do whatever he pleased, and his ways were better than Abel's. Now, Cain despised anything and everything that his brother liked or anything his brother invented. He wouldn't use anything that might make them soft, as he would say. He boasted that he enjoyed to work, and work hard. "That's what God put us here for," he would say. Now, though he never dared to show it, Cain was lonely. He wondered about persons of the opposite sex at times. But till now there was only Cain and Abel and their two sisters, Awan and Aklia. It was an unusual morning. Cain was up early, as was his habit. He had a big fire blazing, and he was sipping the juice from a boiled dandelion root, out of a cup he had carved from the lower half of a burl off an old oak tree. You could see the great sun disk as it rose like a flaming torch, as a purifying forge in a great cauldron of affliction. Cain liked the sun disk especially. It rested his sense of understanding. Life was like that old disk, he thought, round and round, toiling upon the duties of every day, burning up all that stood in its path, and an enemy to all that softened its presence with cunning devices. Those who sought to evade their duties through technological advantage would be burned up by the burning heat of the toil that they sought to flee. They would get softer and softer, he thought. Better to work hard with all that thy hand finds to do, for better is the day of your death than the day you were born. Now there was a river at the bottom of Nod. It was deep as 7 days' journey. The great river was wide. It was the biggest river Cain had ever seen, at least a half a mile across. Now the morning blaze was condescending down from the heights. Even now, with only 1/4 of its arc having shone, it seemed to be taking an unusually long time to rise. The mist from the bottom of the canyon was hovering low around the rim, snaking around the bluffs like a filming plasmic ghost, floating, hovering, searching, feeling around everywhere, and around every nook and edifice, trying to find any unnoticed crack or opening in which to infiltrate its gaseous substance. Even on a clear morning you would find this canyon misty, still volcanic in nature, steaming out every pore and hole, out of the cracks of every face, through the crevices and openings. There were yellow-red stains following the hot spring paths that trickled down from the terraces, with sulphur-green blotches here and there. And except for the green patch growing on the western slope, jetting in and out of the terracing rock pillars, and jettisoning towers which protruded out from the bluffs, like a land of giant rock people solidified in their steps, there was no vegetation at all. And that green was supplied by the man named Cain. It was he that had brought it there, planting every bush, cultivating every tree, plowing the unyielding soil that lay in the crevices of the slopes. He had created this land, a land for the type of man he was, unyielding in attitude, hard in nature, grotesque in stature. But all of this was Cain's land. It was all normal for him. Nothing really was out of place, except that, this morning, Cain felt a sort of deep longing, a longing for the one thing he felt missing. And the arid soil and the misty air seemed to culminate with an eerie resounding, the feelings Cain was knowing, and except for the slow sipping from the dandelion beverage, all was silence and respite. For the feeling within him wasn't like a noise. It didn't tremble or moan. Cain wasn't that sort of man. In fact, Cain was hardly aware of the yearning within himself. He was no whiner. He would push that insipid feeling back into his subconscious mind. Thinking long on those things wasn't his style. No, the feeling within Cain was more like a pressure. It squeezed at his heart silently. It only annoyed him circumspectly, not rushingly, slowly, but tremendously. With every growing pound upon his lonely heart, Cain could sense its ugly nagging, only subconsciously. But he never heard the cry out loud, and still he thought of what his wife might look like. She would be tall and strong like him, no weakling for Cain. Yet she would be eloquently refined from his masculine version. He pictured her in his mind for a moment, not really on purpose, though a stereotype model was amassing within his subconscious. From the dreams he had known, he suspected. He liked that dream. He had been having that same dream now often. Sometimes it would linger like that smoldering mist through the canyons of his consciousness. The memory would hesitate, and then his will would push it aside, as he usually did. But this morning, the images and fantasies wouldn't leave as quickly. Sometimes Cain would wake up in the middle of the night, perspirating with big pellets of sweat dripping down his massive forehead. This dream, or whatever with its images, real or contrived, Cain sometimes didn't know, was actually becoming real to Cain. His thoughts weren't able to dislodge his memories as well now. Cain kept sitting on the terrace of boulders around him, looking off into the direction of the pillars, his mind focusing on the dream. Now there was one edifice-like pillar that stood just off to Cain's left. It was unusually delicate in its sloping, terracing, cascading shapeliness. But Cain had never seen that particular rock before. As his mind now drifted further and further into what was more and more becoming reality for Cain. Now out from the rocks Cain saw or heard something, noticed something, a moving or a rustling. Cain stood up, his massive body bulging, straining to see what it was. A woman appeared, walking straight out from the paralyzed stone figures. "Hello," the woman beckoned. "Who are you?" Cain said. "I'm Lilith," she said. "How did you get here?" "I know of no woman like you," Cain said. "Not consciously," said the woman, "but you know of me all right. I am the woman in the darkness of your thoughts. When light comes, I am darkness. When you dream, I live. That's why I have come to beseech thee." "What could you ask of me?" Cain replied quickly. "I am Cain. I have nothing but this land and these rocks. Do you want rocks? I have land in myself. Nothing else have I to give." "But that is what I want from you," said the woman. "I want yourself. And as for this land, I already own it. For whatever 'tis yours has already been mine. Even thyself belongs to me. I have already been with thee forever. Now I have come to receive thy consciousness." Cain thought back into his dreams. This was truly the woman of the darkness of his thoughts. All that she said seemed true enough, but what of this giving she wanted? He would not give his consciousness to even this one, for that part of him was his alone. It could not be given to another. But Cain felt a great longing for her. This was the woman that he had waited for. Could she be the woman he was to be given from God? Was she the one he was destined to love? The inner longing had become the reality. Cain spoke again. "Oh, woman of my darkness, Queen Lilith of the night, I shall not give thee that, what you ask. I am myself. How can I give to thee which is to be entirely my own?" Lilith moved closer, almost gliding along the ground as she approached him. "I want nothing from you, silly Cain, my husband. I only want to give you something. That which you shall give me shall only be in quality. Your unity shall abide with thee forever. It cannot be given to another. Our passion to each other is like the darkness. It's always giving, but it's never consumed, and though it disappear, it will always return. I already am one with your inner thoughts. But they are like dancing images, shadows upon your mind, which when projected upon me make the images. Therefore I am those images, I am your thoughts, and it is from those thoughts that you are formed, from the inner and then unto the outer manifestation. I have been forming your thoughts many years. Since the first moment thy mind beheld the light of your being, I was the essence that shadowed the light. Without that shadow there could be no image. Thine image is yourself, but the outer image is formed around the circumstances as well. When you meet other people, they are those you meet in the outer world. They can veil my inner workings, but only for a time, for they are only like fleeting thoughts whose images do not truly belong to you. Thus you can see, Cain, that I am within yourself. When the two become one, there is true peace of being, and when the outer becomes like the inner, there shall be no more longer two. I am a prophecy. I am your dream. Your dreams have come to pass now, and I am here. I have come to you in your dreams to be with you. I live on the moon, and I want you to come to me, and I will show you how. Now Cain listened to Lilith, her words dripping down from his inner subconscious mind like melting icicles from the sun. Cain would have resisted her cunning, but all that she said was true. Cain fell under the spell of her mental enchantment, like a moth around the eternal flame. His consciousness yielding like the great passion to the great fog of lust within his being, Cain reached out his hand up to Lilith's face, his hand beckoning his reply in subtle fashion, his finger finding the contour of her high cheekbone. He touched her satin skin ever so softly and gently. Cain had been polarized from within his entire being, from his very birth on down, always growing, falling ever deeper in love. This had not happened overnight. This was the woman Cain had chosen. She had not chosen him. Had she created him, or had he created her? She had begun in his mind early, developing around every whim and desire of Cain's subconscious mind. Now Lilith had become a reality. Now Lilith had become. Now Cain had become. He had become what he was, and they had become one. Now the sun disk was going down over a broad stretch of plain, a land of great wonder, the land where Abel dwelt. It was indeed a wonderful land. And now the sun disk was glistening with kaleidoscope refractions upon pristine phantasmal colors that spread in a rainbow pattern across miles of horizon that was only backdropped here and there with distinctions of hue, brilliant and also fading. The patchwork of delicately balanced flowers, shades from bright yellow to intermingling purple and green. The sky this evening was effervescent with ever-deepening violet, leaving the hinder region a turquoise with fluffy cotton clouds, silhouetting the foreside with pink, and a breeze blew silently past Abel's hair as he stood watching his world, the scene matching like a perfect rhythm the fantasies of his mind. Abel loved the land. He loved animals, life, just about everything, including his brother. Abel's character was a heartfelt knowing. He always followed his heart. He believed in his dreams. He relied upon his intuition. Cain was much too fixed, mentally, Abel would complain. Though Cain was noble and almost heroic in many ways, he lacked sympathy, purity, and spontaneity. Abel lived by the seat of his pants. Life was a journey. The changing reality was reality for Abel. The mental fixation of rigidness that his brother Cain had built up around himself was about as far away from Abel's emotional plane of intuition as the morning sun was from the evening. But this didn't make Abel hate his brother. It only served to create within Abel's heart great sympathy for Cain, which was why Abel dreamed. He dreamed of paradise restored, wonderful love, and great happiness, an escape from reality, or at least the reality which was only apparent from Cain's point of view. For Abel saw no curse on this earth, only possibilities. Abel looked up from his thoughts about his brother, now surprised, as if by some great coincidence. Abel immediately threw up his hands and went running out through the field to meet him. Cain embraced himself physically, as if to outwardly show resistance to Abel's forward welcome. But he didn't actually pull away, as Abel was embracing him. Abel weeping joyfully, he then bent down upon the ground in front of his older brother. Kneeling subjectfully, he humbly offered Cain the entire run of his land. Anything that Cain wanted would be graciously given. Cain had other things in mind that day. Cain was guided that day to the land of Abel by the vision. His mental forces prodding, Lilith was cunningly at work. The dark ego of Cain's thoughts had brought him to the final act. Had Abel been more astute and physically aware that evening, he might have used his mental powers more aggressively. But all Abel knew that day was joy in his heart to see his brother again. It had been some time for Abel. He had so many things to ask him about. How was he getting along? Did he get all of his trees planted like he wanted? Was he happy? But these questions could wait. Cain had something to show him now. This was great. To be going with his brother. He remembered when they were young. Like all brothers, they had their difficulties, competitions, jealousies, envies, but there had always been good times too. Abel remembered those days. Now, Abel thought back on those times, when he would come home late, having put the sheep down after the safety of darkness, the stillness of the night having stilled the lamb's fears. There would his brother be, still pruning, hedging, and cultivating his garden. In those days there were many good times, and the memories were still fresh in his mind. But now the stage was set. There was no turning back for Cain. His covenant was with his inner longing for selfishness. Lilith had become one with Cain's thoughts and was now taking him to the frenzy of insanity. It was 3 days' journey to the land of Nod. Cain and Abel reached there the third day at dawn. Abel was spellbound. He had never seen anything like this land of Nod. The rugged terrain was harsh. Abel was clearly out of his normal environment. Cain was acting excited. There was much to show Abel now. They must walk down into the great gorge. They started without delay, and they quickly sped off down an old trail which seemed to be well used by Cain before. Cain knew that trail well. He seemed to be showing off, walking very quickly. It was hard for Abel to keep up. They jumped from rock to rock. It reminded Abel when they were young. They were always playing games like this one. This must be another one of Cain's games, he thought. I must not show that I'm tired. I can keep up with Cain if I try. If I tell him I'm tired, he's only going to laugh at me. So Abel hid his feelings, afraid to show himself as he really was. He was afraid that if he did not live up to Cain's standards, he would offend him. So he must keep going. Now as they bounced along the trail, dodging limbs, jumping rocks, scaling the cliffs which rose above the rigid bluff-like places, like walls around fortified walls of desolation, below was nothing at all. Above was nothing. Only rocks, cracks, steam, and patches of fading hues. Little pebbles would skid as they cascaded down the sheer embankments. Abel's heart tightened with fear, but he still wouldn't surrender to Cain's desire for victory. Cain was at home here. He knew very well that these canyons would defeat his brother. One wrong move, one false step, then down Abel would tumble to his very death. Without the cooperation of Cain, Abel was doomed. He just couldn't function within Cain's realm without Cain's objective concern for the inner reality of Abel's lacking abilities upon the contrived and rigid fixation, the outright unrelinquishing dogmatism of Cain. Abel slipped. His footing gave way to the loose gravel. He plunged to his death, and Cain rejoiced. Cain had taken his brother to the field of objective concentration. It was a direct assault upon Abel's emotional plane of being. Now later on that evening, Cain was sitting under a stalk of a green leafy shoot which sprang from a cleft of rock that served as a foundation for his sitting thus. He had already forgotten about Abel, for he had no feelings of regret. not consciously, although conscience could not be submerged within him without the countermeasure of least retribution. There is never a cause without an effect. No one would miss the presence of his brother, but not far distant was the propensity of his actions culminating. The voice of the divine radiance reverberated down the canyon. It was heard everywhere throughout the canyon, by all that could hear, or that had ears to hear. That sound fell upon the ears of Cain, as he sat upon the rock, hidden by the only apparent veiling of the green leafy shoot, that green thing that Cain had cultivated. In the garden that seemed to be growing now with grotesque forms, bending and twining around the structural but already ancient, even permanent elements of earth. Yes, even here, although gazing into that deepest of all glens, one would not expect to find that there should be such an ear, such as Cain's. Outwardly it appeared to be a land desolate and uninhabited. Yet in all places there are such ears, if they would only listen. And listen they will, except that for some it finds them only after the reverberation. But it finds the happy souls on the plain without such repetition. But also to all it does verily come, and come it did, that day to Cain, upon his rock, sitting under his retreat from reality, outwardly oblivious to the hideous ordeal. God then spoke, "Where is thy brother Abel?" Cain's guilty conscience knew inherently that he had been responsible for his brother's welfare. He was, after all, the eldest of the two. Had his father Adam not delegated that responsibility to him often, when he and Eve would take their long walks into the forest of the great giant trees that reached unto the heavens? Cain replied to the angel, "Am I my brother's guardian?" But God did not return his sarcasm with injury, but only said, "Your brother now is whispering to me from within the elemental world beneath the ground, and now I will banish you two to the elemental planes. You will not bring your selfish reasoning powers within the lower field of activity. When you bring forth those elemental thoughts, they shall not bring forth their production. You will go to Hades to live like a brute. A wanderer and a fugitive you will become in your brother's plane. For just as he is gone there now, you will soon follow. This to fulfill the prophecy of your father. No one shall go to the land of Nod and keep living." But Cain spoke back to God, "My punishment is too great, for you are actually this very day driving me off the face of the earth, and are sending me into the elemental kingdoms from the face of your glory, and the land of astute reasoning power. You are concealing me within the veil, and there upon that plain I must become a wanderer, drifting around without a set course. The blackness of darkness has been reserved for me. I shall be twice dead, a wild wave of the sea, foaming out mine own shame, a rock of pride, hidden below the waters of life, and it is certain, if someone finds me, they will kill me." So the angel of God's face answered Cain, "Because of this I declare, if anyone kills you, they shall suffer vengeance 7 times. And God began to set a mark upon Cain, so that anyone who should find him would beware before he would think to kill him. God put a horn and made it grow right between the middle of his forehead. The horn was Cain's power. It was the sign of his destructive habits. It showed those that he had gored before. And then he caused his heart to be changed, from being that of a man to that of a beast. His ugliness shall drive him away from mankind. His hideousness shall frighten the most stalwart of warriors. Then God said, "He shall eat vegetation like the animals. His hair will grow long like the scavenger, which eats and lives upon the death and the dead carcasses. His nails shall grow long like the bird's talons, so that he shall be fierce to all those who would seek his life. I have set these signs upon thee, but thou shalt not continue in this debased condition forever. 7 times shall pass over you, Cain, and you shall pass through the 7 gates of vengeance. Then you shall return to that natural state, and ye shall learn that it is I who rules in the kingdom of men, and to whom I want I give or refrain from giving." So Cain was sent away from the angel to the land of Nod. And there Cain took his wife Lilith, and they dwelt some years in the great canyon of Nod. Cain and Lilith gave birth to Enoch, and the child grew strong and capable, like his father. But as the angel had spoken, Cain should be a wanderer. The prophecy of God made to him was not to be just literal. Cain would now be going to the true land of Nod. The plan of God for Cain would make him a wanderer in the greater land of wandering, the netherworld, the place of Sheol. So Cain soon died and took up his residence there on the vast elemental realm. Cain became the prince of the realm of Nod, the land of wandering. Adam and Eve cried for their sons, lamenting and weary of hope that the promised deliverer would come and save their children from this awful state of affairs. Cain was now in Sheol, the land of the departed. Now the earth had been bereft for 100 years for Adam and Eve of their children, and they felt alone. They missed their children, the laughter, the social closeness of the family. They had needed their children, the insight of Abel, the hard-working nature of Cain. But something of Adam and Eve was missing, not just the memory of their sons, or the love that they had for them, but some greater dimension was missing from their consciousness. Abel had added a spirituality that Adam and Eve would miss, and rearing him had deepened their appreciation for the unseen powers and the forces behind the scenes of nature. His peculiar insights into the higher possibilities of consciousness had added to their own spiritual potential. Now that potential was gone. Who would invent the new ideas? Who would bring out that intuitional prognosis within Adam's heart, expanding the inner awareness and heightening of the emotional acquisitions of life? Yes, Cain would also be missed. Cain had brought a certain outer reasonableness, a matter-of-fact type logic, a creative working which expanded the outer world, the outer consciousness, beautifying and supplementing Adam and Eve's thinking. But now they were both gone. Adam and Eve did bring forth many children, but none of their sons born would take the place of their firstborn. For 130 years they lived on earth, and then the man named Seth was born. Now Eve called her son Seth because she said, God has provided a substitute for our son Abel, because Cain killed him. Through him we will see the delivering one. Seth grew up and became strong. In time, Eve accepted Seth as the perfect substitute for her son Abel. She missed Abel's presence, but she now had someone to fill the void she had felt for her lost children. Seth took up the dwelling of Abel's old land. He also continues the work of his brother, and seemed to know inherently within himself the resemblance he had to Abel.